determining whether art is subjective or objective by using sense perception and emotion as ways of knowing. In this presentation, I will only use examples from the visual arts in order to keep the presentation within the time limit. Art, like all other subject areas, contains many knowledge issues. The underlying major issue to many smaller ones is the fact that we do not yet have a single definition of art. The question, what is art, can be approached in many different ways. For the purpose of this presentation, determining whether art is subjective or objective will allow us to discover whether there is a possible universal definition for art. The way people defined art has been changed numerous times over the history of mankind. Although we do not know what very early civilizations defined as art, the ancient Romans and Greeks believed that the human body was an art masterpiece and held high standards for those who exhibited perfection in the human form. This can be seen by many of their statues and pictures depicting art as beautiful humans. During the medieval times, the purpose of art changed. It was now used to tell stories and portray messages, therefore losing much of its aesthetic appeal. When the Renaissance came along, this idea of art needing to be beautiful rose once again. Many paintings and sculptures from this time depicted what the Western society perceived as beautiful. The purpose of art was to have aesthetic appeal. However, this definition changed greatly with the rise of modern art in the 1860s. Modern art refers to many different areas of art which emerged from 1860 to 1970. The Impressionists, such as Monet, began to paint not what they saw exactly, but changed it into something more creative and beautiful. Realists still existed, and those were the artists who painted exactly what they saw. Their paintings were those that resembled photographs. Cubists, such as Picasso, devised methods to include geometric shapes in paintings and sculptures. The postmodern period, which implemented abstract art into the definition of art, changed the way people view what art is even more. Seeing as definitions of art change over time, by distinguishing whether art is either subjective or objective, we may be able to see if we can come up with a common definition of art. Because, if art is subjective rather than objective, that means that art cannot be defined and anything can be considered art. Therefore, let us see if by using emotion and sense perception, we can determine whether art is subjective or objective. Sense perception can be used when trying to gain knowledge from art. The first problem when trying to gain knowledge from art through sense perception is that our senses are limited. Although this may be an extreme example, someone who is colorblind sees a painting much differently than someone who is not. Another problem is that sense perception differs from one person to the next. The way one image looks to me and the way I interpret it may be different from the way someone else sees an image and interprets it. For example, someone who is passionate about abstract art may consider works by Andy Warhol as masterpieces, while someone who does not have an artistic education may consider them a joke and not understand why they would be placed in a museum. In addition, the way people perceive and understand artwork is different depending on who they are and the experience they have had in their lives. A modern example of this is of the Taliban bombing the Bamiyan Buddhas. These massive statues have existed in countries in the Muslim world for many years. However, due to the Taliban thinking that they were against their religion, they could not appreciate their artistic value. The following picture depicts one of the statues which was bombed in 2001. These reasons make it seem as though art is subjective because the knowledge I gain from my sense perception of art is different than the knowledge someone else has gained. However, there are many cases when people do agree to call something a piece of art. Artwork which is displayed in galleries such as the Louvre and other famous museums around the world are universally acknowledged to be art. A clear example would be the Mona Lisa, whom many critics think as one of the greatest masterpieces of all time. Our sense perception allows us to see these paintings, sculptures, or objects and distinguish whether they are beautiful or not, which is one definition which some people believe art should abide by. For example, let us consider the parallel of beautiful art to beautiful women. We have been brought up in a society to form similar views about women we consider beautiful regardless of their race. The majority of us humans can point out a good-looking woman in a crowd of people. This therefore means that there must be some general ability in all of us which allows us to distinguish between something beautiful and something ugly. When looking at art, this ability should exist as well, but in many cases we are influenced by other factors. Immanuel Kant explained that there is a big difference between judgments of taste and judgments of aesthetic beauty. Aesthetic judgments are those which make a universal claim. For example, the painting is beautiful. And judgments of taste are usually centered around what the viewer believes. An example of this would be, I like this painting. To use aesthetic judgment, however, we must be disinterested. By this, Kant means that we should not use our previous knowledge when judging art, and we should look at it beyond our own interests. If aesthetic judgment was more disinterested, then there could be a more global view on what is beautiful and what is not in terms of art. Art critics are examples of people who should judge art disinterestedly. However, even this theory is defeated by the fact that art is not just judged by its aesthetic appeal anymore, as was mentioned in the beginning of this presentation. Art, such as a toilet displayed in a gallery, can be ugly to some people and still be considered art by someone else, because they hold a different definition for art. Therefore, by using sense perception, it is true that we have some consensus of what is beautiful and what is not. So, if we say that art must only have aesthetic appeal, then it seems that it may be able to be objective. However, due to the fact that the definitions of art have changed since the time of the ancient Greeks and Romans, we cannot say that it is totally objective anymore. When observing a piece of artwork, it often happens that an emotion is evoked in our body. One possible way of considering something as art is by looking at whether or not it evokes some emotion in us. If we do feel something when observing it, then the piece, according to our definition, should be considered art, regardless of whatever feeling we get. For example, take the famous painting of John the Baptist with his head on a platter by Caravaggio. The horrid depiction the artist has painted does not bring me any feeling of joy or happiness, and I am a bit repulsed by the painting. However, someone else may look at it and really enjoy it. The painting has possibly evoked some sort of enjoyable feeling in them, making them like it. Although the emotions we get when looking at the painting may be different, it is still considered art because both I and this imaginary person felt something when observing it. Considering art in this way therefore makes it objective, since it now may have a universal definition. This definition, however, is flawed, and can be changed if there is some artwork which evokes no feeling in us whatsoever. For example, some modern painting may be just a canvas painted red. Although one person may look at it and get some sort of emotion from it, someone else may see it and barely notice it in a museum, moving on to the next painting because they did not feel anything from it. In this sense, the definition of art does not hold true because it is possible for our feelings to be subjective. As we have seen, by using sense perception to gain knowledge from art, the knowledge one gains can be both subjective and objective. If we consider that each person may gain different knowledge from art, then art becomes subjective for each person and we are unable to define it universally. However, if we consider art as something which only has to be aesthetically pleasing, then many people may look at the same piece of artwork and find it beautiful, allowing it to be objective. This definition of art being aesthetically pleasing, however, does not hold true for all artwork. Therefore, we must come up with another one. By using emotion to find a definition for art, we may say that for something to be considered art, it must make us feel some sort of emotion, therefore making it objective. However, even if we use this definition, there are many cases where people look at a piece of artwork and do not feel anything about it. This makes our attempt in defining art universally fail once again. Since the knowledge gained from art can be both subjective and objective depending on the situation, then we must come to the conclusion that there is yet no universal way of defining art.